Lance, first of all, thank you very much for asking to do this. We really appreciate it.
That's my pleasure.
I'll press straight on. And these are all questions. I've summarized the questions posed by a lot of people on ShedWeb. Is it possible for the club to be a consistent top four side and be successful in Europe, competitive in Europe, with its current financial model? And I think what they're referring to there is, just as Martin became a shareholder when the Walkinshaws sold him some shares, is the club open to outside investment?
Yeah, slightly two different questions there. Are we capable of challenging for top four in the current model? We spend and plan to continue to spend up to the salary cap. So that should mean that we will be as competitive as any other club. So within the Premiership, our intention, our first goal is that we become a consistent top four club, because if you do that, then that puts you in the best possible position to start winning things. Europe is slightly more challenging because there are salary caps in France, for example, but they're much higher than the English one. And the Irish clubs have a different setup, again, where they tend to play their best players only in the Champions Cup. So that puts some additional challenges on that. But they're not impossible, as we saw with Exeter. So it's there's no reason at all why we can't be competitive if we're properly organised. The second part of your question about outside investment is one that we would look at. There's nothing specific that I can say at the moment. There's a lot of interest in rugby. The fact that CVC have invested so heavily in the Premiership and in other rugby areas has meant that a number of other investment companies and individuals are also now looking at investing in rugby. So it's actually quite an exciting time. But I can't give you any specifics on that in a minute.
Of course. Notwithstanding the fact that we have a salary cap, how can the league ever reconcile the differing views of such a wide range of owners with vastly different financial resources? For example, the salary cap is one thing, but Bristol can spend however much it was on a new training centre, and not every club can match that kind of expenditure.
No, that's true, and it's, you know, our job is to when we are trying to attract players to Gloucester Rugby, most clubs will offer a pretty similar salary for a similar kind of player. If a particular position is in very short supply, or if a club's got a particular issue, they might pay a bit more. But generally, the salaries are reasonably similar within the cap. So then the job is to show what else is good about coming to Gloucester Rugby, and of course we have a massive advantage in that we've got such a passionate set of fans, and that makes a really big difference to players, because there are some clubs that also have some passionate fans. There are other clubs that really don't, and don't get very many people even coming to watch. So, you know, the Shed is probably the most famous stand in certainly English rugby, possibly even world rugby, and that's a genuine advantage. You know, when players come, one of the first things that they often say is, "It's going to be great having the Shed behind me, not on my back all the time." And it's a genuine, you know, it's a genuine thing. It's respected throughout the game. So no, we're not going to have a £10 million training facility that we can use to attract players, but we do have a fantastic stadium. We do have a fantastic fan base. We are an absolutely traditional, proper rugby club, and that's very attractive. And you may well be going to be asking me about it later, but we actually are going to have a fantastic training centre that we will be able to attract players with.
I will ask you about it. Yeah. What's the club's view on marquee players? I mean, is this not simply a way of getting around the salary cap?
Is it a way of getting around the salary cap? Well, not really, because it's within the regulations. So in that respect, it's not. there's a few views on this, and I'm personally pleased that it's the impact of marquee players is being reduced, because we're all in a difficult financial situation, even clubs with a lot of money, and you mentioned one of them earlier, are feeling the squeeze from COVID in particular, and the salary cap is being adjusted downwards next season, and there's additional restrictions, and it's important that we get to achieve that, to be within that salary cap. We have to reduce player salaries from where they have historically been, and some of that's already happened with the 25% reduction that we put in place, and that our players were very good about. A marquee pressure puts upward pressure on salaries, because if you're playing in a team with somebody who is earning £1 million, then when you come to talk about your next contract, inevitably that comes into the conversation. So the more that we can reduce the impact of the salaries that go with a marquee player, I think it's better for the game overall. It doesn't really help, I don't think, to have somebody on potentially so much more than everybody else at the club or in the league. But overall, with the changes that are happening with salary cap, it's getting to a point where the club's finances are more manageable and more realistic to achieve. And I don't see it having any real impact on the talent that's at the club or in the Premiership, because the salaries that are available are still pretty good. And we still seem to be attracting good players to the Premiership.
Okay. We've got now the one-season moratorium on relegation, and rumours that it could be extended a little bit further. BT were unhappy with even the 12-month moratorium. How do we square away their views going forward? Is it going to be difficult?
Well, the relationship with BT is with PRL. That's a central central arrangement. As with most things, the key is to involve everybody in the discussions, in my view, and that's something that PRL and the clubs are planning to do. We've announced what's happening for this year, and also announced that there's going to be discussions involving all of the interested parties as to what should happen going forwards, and that will include BT. I've actually been on a call this afternoon where we were talking about it. So I think when you do involve all of the interested parties and everybody understands what it means, that helps guide everybody towards a common approach. And I've seen fans talking about, the end of relegation will be a disaster, and it'll mean that there's no competitive games, and we'll never have another Exeter and all that kind of thing. Actually, the likelihood of having another Exeter is pretty small, but pretty small isn't the same as nothing. And it's important to, as a group of clubs, we want to grow the game. That's what we want to do. So if there are clubs that are capable of coming up to the Premiership and being competitive, that's a great thing. What isn't in anybody's interest is having a situation where a club comes up completely ill-equipped, doesn't have the finances to compete, and however much people may like it or not, finances are a huge part. It's a professional game. If you're not spending to the salary cap, you are going to find it hard to compete. So if a club were to come up and be spending half of the salary cap, that they will get beaten every week. That's the reality of it, and that doesn't help anybody. That's not expanding the game. That's just ticking a box and letting somebody come up. So I think it's important that there are minimum standards in place before any team is promoted. But if they are promoted and they do meet those standards, that's fantastic. And then if it turns out that there are other teams in the future currently in the Championship or working their way up through the Championship that are also able to be competitive, then that too is definitely worth looking at and considering. What doesn't make sense, especially at the moment, is for a Premiership club to be relegated to the Championship when the Championship is in a very difficult position. You know, this season there are clubs in the Championship who are not sure if they can afford to even start because of the cost of testing. You know, and that's nothing against those clubs. There's great clubs in the Championship. You know, some really, really good clubs in there. But at the moment, there's quite a big gulf between the Premiership and the Championship, and that needs to be. We need to be sure that anybody coming up from the Championship, as I say, is going to be competitive.
Okay, the pitch has come in for a fair bit of criticism, and I think that's disappointed a lot of people because the pitch was sold very heavily as being state of the art and so on. What are the reasons for the problems we've been having with that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it is very disappointing. There were things that were promised with the pitch that haven't turned out to be the case, and one of the issues is that the pitch doesn't seem to be draining as it should, and that's a big issue that we have investigated, and we know the reasons why it's not draining as it should. What we're now looking at is how we rectify that. It actually comes back to a little bit of some of the problems that I and my team inherited when I arrived. That there are a lot of instances of things not having been done as well as they should have been. And to be honest, I've spent a large part of the nearly 18 months that I've been here now trying to rectify things that should have been done better to start with, and the pitch is one of those. You know, one of the things that I found, and you know, you may be coming on to talk about culture or anything else, but overall standards were not high enough at the club. And you know, if you look at our history, we've been, in the last 9 years, we've been 9th 5 times. So, you know, and I said this at the fans forum recently. You know, we're not coming off some fantastic legacy of what was happening. You know, we've come from a position where, as I say, in my opinion, the standards have not been high enough, and that's been quite a big part of the task that I and my team are now taking on, is to raise those standards. And sometimes those issues are very obvious, like with the pitch, and sometimes they're not very obvious, but nonetheless, they still take time to fix.
One of the reasons that people asked was, is part of the problem with the pitch that it's being overused for training now? And that brings us on to the training centre, which you alluded to earlier. So maybe now's the time.
Yeah, no, it's not, is the answer. And it's, I've also seen people saying, you know, is it because we've cut back on the ground staff and whatever? We haven't cut back on ground staff. We've got Stu and Chester who do a great job with the pitch. There really isn't anything more that they could do with it. It's not a function of what they're doing. It's not a function of too much training on the pitch. It's excuse me. It's just that there's an issue with the drainage. So
yeah,
that's the issue there.
So in terms of the training ground and the plans for that?
Yeah, the training ground, we're at the point of exchanging contracts on where we're going to be putting the training ground. So we should be able to make an announcement, I expect, within a month now.
Right. Okay. And will there be a while before, after the contracts are signed, before the work is completed on the training ground? And if that's the case, where will you go in the meantime?
We'll have the new training ground will be ready before the start of next season. So fine. It's the timing is tight. We had plans. COVID interrupted those plans. COVID's cost us probably around £8 million, something like that. So the plans that we had as I say, were interrupted and we couldn't commit until we knew what was happening financially. But we've now got some government support, which means the club survives, means we can carry on with our plans. So we're now signing contracts, and as I say, we'll be able to announce it I expect within a month.
Excellent. You alluded to culture earlier, and looking back, George is our 6th head coach in less than 12 years.
Yeah.
And if you look at that for any club, it raises a question, doesn't it? Have the changes of coach been part of the problem of the culture of the club?
I think that would be a really fair assumption. You know, one of the things that you need, you know, and my background as people I think know, I was 30 years in the automotive industry, and one of the things that you learn is that you need to plan for long-term success. Short-termism never works. You know, there are times when you do need to take action and you know, do it quickly and put a sticking plaster on something, but as a strategy that never works. So you have to plan long term, and that's what we're doing now. And I've seen people calling for me to be fired and George to be fired and you know, Uncle Tom Cobley and all to be fired. You know, that really isn't the answer. You know, we've got plans in place to build this club to where we all feel it should be over the next 10 years or more. And, you know, George has got a long-term contract, and, you know, we all of the plans that we're making are long-term plans, and you can't have a knee-jerk reaction to, you know, what's admittedly a disappointing set of results, but we know the reason for those results. You know, the thing that, you know, planning a rugby club is complicated. There are things that you can change quickly, and there are things that take time. You know, just taking the player side of it, you know, the players are on generally 2 or 3 year contracts, not all of them, but generally it's 2 or 3 year contracts. So if a new coach comes in and isn't happy with the squad for whatever reason, or wants to make tweaks to it or whatever, so some of those players, you can't do anything about it for 3 years. So if you change coach every 2 years, they literally never get their own squad in place. They're always dealing with what they inherited, and sometimes what you inherit is fantastic. You know, that's fine, but it's very rare that a new coach would come in and the squad be exactly what they want, and players doing exactly what they want them to do. So if you don't have a long-term plan, you're always going to be compromised. So the answer to your question, does 6 coaches in 12 years, is that part of the problem? Yeah, it's a compromise, and that's why we want to appoint a young and English coaching team, and it's why we're going to stick with them for the next hopefully 10 years. It's important for us to have that stability in place and to be making those long-term plans, and we're already doing that in some of our recruitment. You know, it's a slightly unusual time for recruitment at the moment because of the changes in the salary cap. A lot of clubs gave players longer contracts in order to stabilize things a bit as the salary cap changed. Yeah. So there are fewer players available at the moment than there would normally be. But even so, with that recruitment, we've had opportunities to sign players, and we haven't taken them because they're okay, and they would have been okay for this season, but then they don't fit in with what we want to do long term. And you know, what we want to do long term is to have people across the club, not just in the playing side, with high standards and a high work ethic. And you know, the playing side, what we specifically want in the playing side, that's entirely down to George, but the standards and the ethos needs to be the same across the club. So we've not signed players that we've had the opportunity to sign because they don't fit in with that ethos, and instead we've waited for a player that we knew was becoming available later because they do fit in with the ethos. And that sometimes frustrating. And, you know, I'm sure fans are looking in at the squad and saying, oh, why don't you just do this and why don't you just do that? And I've seen people saying, you know, why didn't you sign a replacement for Danny Cipriani? You know, the reality is we did, and a very good replacement for him, but he's contracted to Glasgow until the end of this year. So Adam Hastings will be with us next year. And that's the way that we're trying to do things, to take a long-term view. And I appreciate that that's sometimes going to be frustrating for fans who want immediate success. But, you know, and I mentioned it earlier, that the background, the history of this club, you know, we're not coming from, you know, I've had people writing to me saying, you know, well, we used to be top half and now we're bottom of the league. You know, what are we doing? We didn't used to be top half. You know, we've been top half twice in the last 9 years. You know, one of those, we were third a couple of years ago when Danny joined, and we had a remarkable injury-free run. Yeah. And actually, and I know this sounds mad, but the weather was great, and that's
dry pitches. Yeah,
that Johan wanted to play. And 9 years ago, I think we finished fifth. Other than that, we've been ninth 5 times. You know, much as we would like to believe, you know, we're a hugely successful club, we haven't been. You know, our average position over the last 9 years is 7.5. You know, when Johan left, we were 9th. So, you know, yeah, I know we're 12th now, but the building blocks that we've got in place are improving what we're doing. And even in the medium term, it's gonna bring much greater success than continual short-term actions.
Let me give you a chance to nail one thing that you've nailed in the past. You won't be rushing off without telling George and signing any players for us.
Yeah. Look, let me make this clear. I have never, ever signed a player. Okay. My signature does go on the player contracts. It's the last one to go on. And my role in it is to make sure it fits within the budget. So, you know, I know there was talk about, you know, I went off and signed Johnny May and all the rest of it. I did not go off and sign Johnny May. The first time that I even had any contact at all with Johnny was after the contract was signed, when I texted him to say, welcome back. Yeah. And the only reason I actually had his phone number was because when I was at Mitsubishi, we'd done some work together when he was at England. So that was the first contact. And it's a source of actually huge frustration for me. You know, last summer, Andy Good made some claims on his podcast that were 100% untrue, that I was a super fan, that I was trying to, you know, I spent time in the players' changing room trying to be friends with them, that I was interfering in the playing side. And what was frustrating about it was that he never made any specific, he never gave anything to back those up, because there wasn't anything to back them up. And I don't know Andy Good, but I do know Jim Hamilton from his time here at the club. And I texted Jim to say, look, if you want to hear the real story of what happened, come in and I'll tell you, and you won't be able to publish it, but I'll tell you what it is so that you can stop this nonsense. And he didn't even reply. So okay. that was hugely frustrating. And it's even more frustrating that some fans still seem to repeat, oh, I hear that he's too close to the playing side. You know, my role as chief exec is to manage what happens in this club. And am I involved in the playing side? I'm involved in as much as we sit down and we talk about what the budget's going to be. And, you know, we've put together a plan for the squad. And when I say we, I mean me, Alex and George, but a plan for the squad and what it will look like, so that we're monitoring how much we're spending in each position, how old each player is in each position, and the split between what we're spending on the forwards and what we're spending on the backs, and looking at the academy guys coming through and where they're going to fit in. And I helped to put together the outline of that plan. How that's populated, the names that go into it, is nothing to do with me. I don't have any input at all to that. That's purely down to George and the analyst guys. And actually one of the things that George has introduced is a much clearer way of analysing a player's strengths before they bring him in, or before they propose bringing him in. So do I interfere in the playing side? Absolutely not. Am I involved in it? Yes, in the planning and the financial planning of it. Do I have any input to selection or which players we target, or, you know, any of those other things, absolutely not.
Okay, great. A couple of long-term fans raised this one, and it's a bit of an odd one, but when you look back, I can see where they're coming from. All clubs experience injuries, but some of the long-term fans feel that every season, Gloucester seems to have a real, a particularly bad spell with injuries. And is that wide of the mark, or is it something that the club has looked at to see whether it has anything to it?
Yeah, we look at it all the time, and the strength and conditioning guys and the medical guys do spend a lot of time analysing injuries and the cause of the injuries and where it happens and in what circumstances. We've actually got, I think, certainly the best medical and S&C team in the league, and actually possibly in club rugby. So we have a very good setup with that. We don't have a disproportionately high level of injuries. One of the things that is always the case, fans look very closely at what's happening at their own club and not as closely at what's happening in other clubs. We don't have a disproportionate level of injuries. What we do have is, and it's kind of goes back to the squad plan that I was talking about, where we now analyse the age of the players, and when we look forward 3 or 4 years, we plan not just by who it is, but how old they're going to be and what they're costing, so that we've got a proper replacement plan, a succession plan all the way through, leading back into the academy. But when you look at the squad that we have, there's a lot of youngsters and there's a lot of players over 30, and there's not very much in the middle. And we're starting to address that with some of the players that we're now bringing in their kind of mid-20s. But at the moment, the squad's been quite polarised. And it's often the case that the higher paid players are the over 30s because they have the experience. And there's nothing wrong with over 30 players. You know, we have some fantastic players who are over 30. But generally, there's a higher propensity to get injured once you're over the age of 30. It's, you know, it's a tough game.
Yep.
So, and you'll have seen that. You know, we've had a number of key players who are over 30 and have had, you know, pretty long-term injuries, and that's affected us quite badly. And because our squad has a slightly disproportionate level of over 30s and their key players, you tend to notice it more. So okay. The injuries that we've had this season, the particular problem that we've had is in controlling the game. So Willie's been out injured, Danny left, Lloyd came in, did a great job, but then got injured. And then we're struggling for 9s and 10s. You know, Joe Simpson's injured, and we're struggling for 9s and 10s. And that means that it's much more difficult to control the game. You know, and on top of that, we've had, you know, Jake Pelledri's been injured, and Ben Morgan's been injured. So we've not had, you know, and Ruan's done a great job at 8, but when he's not playing, then you're down to less experienced players and still, you know, doing a great job. But when you don't have that spine of the team as your first choice, you're always going to struggle more than if you have. And that's what's particularly affected us this year, I think.
Okay.
So I don't think we have a worse issue with injuries. I think this season we've been unfortunate in where they've come.
Okay. Here's a very specific question for you. How do we keep hold of Lewis Rees-Zammit?
He's got a contract and he wants to stay.
Fantastic. That's easy. You mentioned Danny Cipriani, and I'm not going to ask you about him because everything that needs to be said has been said, I think. So let's keep it general. How does any club square away the attention that a really high-profile player gets with the fact that rugby is the ultimate team game? Does that cause problems?
It kind of depends, you know, and it's a balance. Our strategy is to invest heavily in the academy, and hopefully you might ask me about something about that later on, what that means. But we want to have more Gloucester boys playing for Gloucester Rugby, because if you come through our academy and you're indoctrinated into the ways of the club, and it becomes part of what you do, and it's part of your development, and it's part of growing up, you're going to have a stronger feel for the club and a stronger feel for that team. So that's a great position to have as your bedrock. But you're always going to want to sprinkle any team with a bit of stardust, and sometimes you'll find that stardust coming through your academy, and sometimes you'll end up recruiting it in. What is important is that whoever comes in is a team player. And yeah. I mentioned earlier that we have a process by which we recruit people, and our analysts, George and the coaching team, set out the key attributes they want from a player. So, if you're looking for, I don't know, whatever position it might be, what are the bits that, how does that position fit into the way that we want to play? And what are those attributes? And okay, measure each player within this environment as to where they rank for these key attributes. And that's how we ended up targeting Adam Hastings, because he came out on top of the attributes that we were looking at. So we go through all of that process, but however well players do in that analysis, the first question we ask is he a good bloke? And right. We ask around, and if the answer is, actually he's not, that's as far as it goes. So you can be a superstar, an absolute world beater, but if you're not a good bloke, you're not going to join Gloucester Rugby. And, okay. And so that's the way that we now manage it, because it's the old All Blacks thing, no dickheads, and that's what we're implementing here.
Okay, couple of other questions that sort of follow on from each other. When we get crowds back, do you think we'll have a challenge attracting the crowds in, or will there be pent-up demand and they'll want to come?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that we've looked at. We put season tickets on sale just at the end of December, and they're running very strongly. They're behind last year, but last year was a record year, and they're running about 5% behind that. So not very much at all. So I think there will be demand for people to come back. If you look at what happened after the Second World War, which is the only real comparison to where people couldn't really go out for an extended period of time, attendances at sporting events shortly after that were huge, at real peak volume. So there's an argument that says you're going to get that. The people I speak to are desperate to come back to watch Gloucester Rugby. So I hope that will be a positive. But what I do also think is that there's a possibility that some people, and it might be older people, feel less inclined to come out. Yeah. And it might be, people get used to things quite quickly, and people might have got used to, actually, if I watch it on a Friday night at home, I'm in the warm and I don't get wet, and whatever else it might be. And there might be a temptation from some people to stick with that. So we need to, season tickets are important to us. That gives us an indication of what crowds are likely going to come back. But we do need to look at how we attract new people to the game as well. And the holy grail that everybody wants to do is to attract more young people in, and we need to have a look at how we do that. We're fortunate in that we have two pretty big universities right on our doorstep, and there's probably more that we could do with that. But also, this isn't a Gloucester Rugby issue. This is a general rugby issue, yeah. And all the clubs are working together with PRL to look at how we can attract more people to the game, and we're pretty advanced in some of those plans. And I can't share what they are just now, but fairly shortly I will be able to share what they are. What I think we need to do, I think we do a pretty good job around this area of saying to people, if you come and watch Gloucester Rugby, what we really need to do is to get to people who perhaps haven't thought of going to watch a rugby match. And the most effective way of doing that is probably to do it through PRL, because then you can do a national campaign saying, why don't you go and watch rugby? If you look at, we've got the Six Nations on at the moment, and I know it's an unusual one because fans can't go, but normally everybody wants to go and watch the Six Nations, and only a relatively small number of people can. And I speak to a lot of people, and I say, do you ever go and watch? Oh yes, yeah, I usually manage to get a ticket for the Six Nations. And I'll say, well, and do you go to watch club rugby? And they haven't even thought about it. Mm. Even though in a lot of cases it's the same players who are playing, or some of the same players. So if we can get a national campaign that says, look, you've just watched England and Scotland and Wales and Ireland playing in the Six Nations, why don't you go and watch those same players? They're just down the road from you, and the tickets are 50 quid or 30 quid or whatever it is, instead of the 120 quid that it is at Twickenham. There must be an opportunity to attract new people in that way, and that's what we're trying to do.
I hate the phrase customer experience, but someone raised it. And what are the sort of things that you're looking at purely at a Gloucester level to enhance the customer experience at Kingsholm?
Yeah, it's another good question, and we've done a huge amount of work on this because we've not had fans in the stadium in any kind of volume for nearly a year now. And what I said to the team here is, normally we're really busy in looking after fans, looking after the hospitality guests, making plans for them. During the period where we're not going to have those people here, let's make it fantastic for when they come back. So we've been talking to Green King, we've been talking to Freeman's who do the food around the Stadium Bowl about what can we do so that when fans do come back, they go, blimey, this is better than I remember. So again, we're not quite there in terms of being able to say what that is now, but we've been having long conversations with both Freeman's and with Green King, and they're going very well. For the hospitality guests that we have, we're going to have a new way of managing the hospitality. And that's going to lead to an improvement in what we offer and in the choices that we offer, and both on the food and the drinks side. So there'll be some quite big differences then. We're just about to contact those people to invite them in so that we can explain what those differences are going to be. That's probably going to be June before we can do that. Not from our point of view, but from when we can get people back in good numbers again. And I'm going to give you an absolute exclusive here, just for ShedWeb. But before fans come back, we will have a new PA system in the ground. So it's something that's been frustrating for quite a long time, and
at least 10 years.
It does get mentioned once or twice, but we've actually, and again, this is Landways, who are our Wi-Fi partner. We've been working with them to use the Wi-Fi setup that they've already installed to get a much better PA system. And they've been very good, and we've actually managed to negotiate with them so that they've done it as part of our existing arrangement. So it hasn't even cost us anything.
Fantastic.
So yeah, fingers crossed, it's going to be a fantastic system.
Again, a long-standing fan, who I think is an 1873 member, raised this one. The biggest financial treasure in his view that the club has is naming rights for Kingsholm. And we've seen things like Welford Road, which everyone is always going to call Welford Road, but it's now officially, what is it, Matiola Woods or whatever. Is that something that you're giving some thought to? Because it could be, as they say, a nice little earner, couldn't it?
It's possible, but we're in the process of looking for a new main partner to replace Mitsubishi when their deal comes to an end this summer. If that partner said to us, and we really want to rename it, the whatever Kingsholm,
yeah.
If we felt that was appropriate, then we would consider it. Yeah. I think it's unlikely that we would do it because, and I've been on the other side of the fence here. When I was at Mitsubishi, I negotiated the sponsorship deal with England Rugby, and they talked to us about renaming Twickenham as, Mitsubishi Twickenham, and we didn't take it because it risks alienating some fans, And also, as you say, nobody will use it. The only stadiums that are really referred to by a sponsor's name, generally speaking, are when they are new stadiums. So fans don't tend to take much notice of that kind of renaming. So we'd have to be sensitive to that. So it wouldn't be ruled out, but I think it's unlikely.
Okay. So we're getting towards the end, Lance. Some quick fire questions. And this is one that's a real emotive one amongst some fans. Could the shirts have the Gloucester City crest added to them in the same way that Exeter does?
No, we'll do it better than Exeter do.
Okay, that's fine. What do you feel is the biggest strength of Gloucester as a club and as a business?
As a club, there's no question that it's the heritage of the club. It's the fan base. It's the fact that, you know, when you talk to fans, you know, they come because their dad used to bring them, and their dad came because their granddad used to bring them. And I think that's a truly unique setup, and it's partly because of where we are. You know, we're in the city. We're right in the centre of the city. It's quite easy to get to. And it isn't just the city, it's the whole county that gets behind the club. So that, I think, is very precious indeed, and something that we're hugely proud of. And actually, part of our plans going forward is to build on that. And some of the academy work that we're doing is based on what it means to play for Gloucester Rugby. It's not an ordinary rugby club.
You mentioned the academy again there, and before I get to my last couple of questions, let me give you the chance to say anything else you want to say on the academy, because it's clearly a huge part of the plans for the club going forward, isn't it?
It is, and we've been advertising for a director of academy, and that's a serious investment on our part, and actually it's an indication of how seriously, you know, we're managing things. We have had financial difficulties. Everybody knows that because of COVID. We've got a government grant, a government loan, which means that the club's not in danger. We will be paying that back for many years to come. So we're still going to need everybody's support in that respect. But what we're not doing is compromising on the playing side. And one of the big things that we've done is investing heavily in the academy. So to appoint a director of academy, and Peter Walton staying on as the academy manager, so it's an additional investment, because we want to properly coordinate what we do and have a proper feeder system, a pull system, so that George says, in 3 years' time, I'm going to need a new tight head, and I'm going to need a new, you know, fullback, or whatever it might be, and that draws through the academy. And we look at what have we got in we've introduced a new level of the academy called the Elite Academy. So they're guys who are still in the academy, but are kind of third choice for the first team generally. So you'll see them play, especially if we get injuries, but they're technically still in the academy. And then we'll have the senior academy and junior academy, all the way down to the community game, where it becomes a bit more not blurred, but there's more responsibility other than just talent spotting, because by the time you get down to watching youngsters at school, it can't just be about talent spotting. It has to be about teaching the love of the game and the values of the game as well. So this role is going to help coordinate all of that, and it's going to mean that we not only make sure that we tap into all of the talent across the county, and our patch actually extends into Oxfordshire as well, but we teach people the love of the game in those areas, and we can also help with coaching, which means that there'll be, and I don't, you know, we're not saying that it means that, you know, the schools are all going to coach in the same way that George Skivington does, but the ethos and the ideas behind it we will have helped shape. So it will mean that we coordinate things much better, not just across the club, but across the sport, across the county, where people want to do that. So that's a really serious investment, and the director of academy will become part of the senior management team. The way that we work here is that myself and Alex and Richard, the finance director, and George, and whoever takes over as director of academy, when we're talking about strategic things, we all get involved in it. So even though we all have our own area of expertise, we discuss it as a group, so that we're getting a cross-fertilization of ideas, and this person will join us in that small group. It's a really powerful setup and a really exciting one. And I know that no other club is doing it the way that we're going to. It's a really exciting plan that we've got.
Excellent. If we go forward 3 or 4 years, how will Martin and you and George measure success?
Well, the first measure of success is that we need to be regularly competing for a top 4 place. So that's the first measurement that we want to achieve, because if we're doing that, then we have a chance of winning things, and that's what we're here for. And some people know, when I had my first interview with Martin and I said, you know, what's the objective of the club? He was absolutely clear as to win things, and that's what we're all working towards. The commercial people who, you know, sit in the office outside where I do, on my first day, I said to them, you know, what do you think your objective is? And you know, people saying, oh, you know, make sure the accounts are done on time, or I do this or I do that. And actually, that's not the right answer. The right answer is I'm helping Gloucester Rugby win things, and that's what we're all working towards. So that would be the first step of that. And it's important that people understand that, you know, it's not going to be overnight success. You know, Exeter's overnight success took them 25 years. You know, ours I hope won't take us quite that long, but this isn't something that's going to be fixed overnight. You know, it hasn't become a problem overnight. You know, we've been languishing around 9th place for the last decade. So we have to put the plans in place. We have to have the confidence to see them through, which we do have, and we have to allow everybody time for them to come to fruition. And it is probably going to be 3 or 4 years before we start really seeing sustained success. You know, we will improve in that time, but that's the kind of timescales that we're realistically looking at.
Okay. Your job it's a big job, and the tendency is for it to be an all-consuming job. How does Lance Bradley unwind?
At the moment, I don't. Yeah, well, we've just moved house, so I now live in the county, so that makes things a bit easier. I had previously been having an hour and a half's journey each way, so right. Finally managed to sell and move, so that's helped. I shoot and I go fishing, so that takes my mind off things, and we've actually just got a new puppy, so that's keeping us both awake at night, but also once he's old enough to go out, there's some beautiful parts of the country around here, so we'll be walking around those as well. Okay,
and final question, that's a good one that somebody posed. What question do you rarely get asked, even though you're thinking about the answer an awful lot?
Well, there's not. I mean, there's a lot of things, as you say. My role is quite all-encompassing. So, and we're doing a lot of work that most people will never see. So I don't really expect questions on it. But the questions that are on my mind, you know, the club has to operate as a single entity. You can't have a playing side and it be separate from the commercial side, because they feed off each other, and if one's successful, the others are successful. So we've got lots and lots of projects on the go at the moment that are occupying my time a lot. You know, we've just launched the Gloucester Rugby Business Club, which we're very excited about, because we think that can provide a real way of local businesses getting together and all helping each other, and we can be a pivotal part of that. So we've got those kind of things going on. We've got other plans going on with some, I mentioned some of them on the catering and whatever. So those are the things that, you know, I'm asking those questions all the time, but I don't really expect fans to ask, what are we doing? Because, you know, what they want to do is see us win on the pitch. And everything that we're doing is geared towards that. But we need to put the building blocks in place, which we have, and the success on the pitch will come, because in the end, if you keep doing the right things, you do end up getting the right result.
Great. Lance, thank you very much for approaching us to do this. And a number of people have asked me to express their gratitude, not only for you doing this, but also for your efforts in steering Gloucester Rugby through what are, well, for everyone, uncharted waters, and certainly not what you expected when you became CEO. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Cheers.
Great. Cheers, Colin.